Welcome to Three Count Commentaries. It's been a while, but people are very, very angry at Eric Bischoff. And it's been several weeks since I did a Smart Tier segment, and I feel that it is now time to bring back the classic. All Eric Bischoff said was that he's not a fan of pro wrestling matches. That's all he said. But he put it into more context. Actually makes a lot of more sense. But how many people just read the headlines, got very, very mad, and then decided they were going to emote all over the internet about what Eric Bischoff has to say about pro wrestling? Now let's get right into this thing. There's no time to waste. We're probably going to be here for a little while though. Hope you like the sound of my voice. So this is a transcript from 83 Weeks podcast. Eric Bischoff, I'm just not that big of a fan of wrestling matches. Oh boy. So he says, quote, I'm going to get burned. I'm going to get crucified for what I'm about to say. But guess what? I don't care. I'm just not that big of a fan of wrestling matches. I'm a big fan of the story and the way the show is architected, built, formatted, created. I'm a big fan of new ideas. Sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. So that is the full quote in context. Bischoff does not care about matches. He really only cares about the story and everything around the story. Everything else around the show. Now, Eric Bischoff, for people who are not familiar with Eric Bischoff, he was not really a wrestling guy. He was an announcer outside the ring. He did color commentary. He worked in the AWA at first, so he's been around wrestling for over 30 years, okay? But he was never there's no stories that I can think of Eric Bischoff being a guy who liked wrestling as a kid. I've never heard any stories of Eric Bischoff being like a fan, when he was growing up, how he went to the matches or anything like that. I didn't hear any stories about Eric Bischoff being like some super fan when he was a kid. He was a guy who was an entrepreneur. He fell ass backwards into wrestling. It was like, hey, I need to feed my family because this entrepreneur thing ain't really working out. So he started working as an announcer. He's a pretty good looking guy, so they actually was able to, use him on TV and everything. Then he bounced around and found his way into WCW, where he still wasn't that interested in the wrestling. He worked in the office. So when he finally got creative control of the company at WCW, and to some degree that he got creative control, he was more interested in building a story. He was also more interested in running a business. So the in-ring product wasn't really his main focus. Now for fans, the nuts and bolts of in-ring work is for them the most important thing, even though it shouldn't be, but it is. So Bischoff, again, is a guy who is giving his perspective as a wrestling personality, but more of a wrestling executive, which is why he doesn't really critique the matches too much. He critiques, people's business decisions. He critiques, the promotion and marketing of different wrestlers, whether the ratings are good enough for the shows, all this kind of stuff. That's the stuff that he likes to critique. And it's like, that's the stuff that's very interesting for him. We can sit down and listen to, if you want to listen to wrestlers talk about wrestling matches, most of them blow through wrestling matches pretty quickly. They just kind of say, oh, this was a botch, that was a botch, this was a problem, that was a problem. Generally the psychology of a wrestling match, but you'll be hard pressed to find too many wrestlers who do podcasts that go into the nuts and bolts of a wrestling match. Most of those, you probably need to look up Al Snow or Raven on YouTube, and they'll tell you about the psychology of, in-ring work and all that kind of stuff. But generally speaking, for wrestling personalities who do podcasts and stuff like that, they are far more interested in the matches and the news around it. I've had to count myself among these people. That we're the ESPN of pro wrestling. We talk about everything. We talk about the matches when they happen, but we talk a lot about the storylines and building up to the matches too, because that's the draw. That's what gets people interested. I myself, I've said this before, I don't have dream matches. I don't sit around thinking about, oh, this could be a really good match. Like, I've been watching this shit since I was 6 years old. I've been watching this shit for 32 years. There's pretty much nothing you can do on a wrestling ring that I haven't seen already. All right. So once you get to that point, that kind of stuff begins to sort of lose interest. If it was just wrestling matches on wrestling shows and without any storylines, without any characters, without anything like that, I probably wouldn't even be watching this stuff. And I'm not even going to hold you up. So I don't disagree with Eric Bischoff. Part of what makes wrestling interesting is the storylines, the angles, the promos, the characters, everything that goes around it. Once they get into the physical confrontation is supposed to be informed by the story that goes into it. Just like a fight scene in a Jackie Chan movie. They don't just pop up and start fighting. There's a reason why they are fighting. Now, sometimes they have to fight to create a new reason to fight, you know? And sometimes that happens. Sometimes you have to have a cold match that leads to a hot match later, or leads to an angle or something like that. I accept that. But I'm not a big fan of cold wrestling matches either. I'm just not. You know, and if I do get in the mood to watch a cold wrestling match, then I'm just in the mood for it. But 3 hours of it, 2.5 hours of it, or whatever, no. You know, just not interested. And a lot of other people agree. You know? What Eric Bischoff said, there was nothing criminal about what he said. There was nothing over the top about what he said. Besides the fact that it's just his opinion, it's not that big of a deal. You know, Vince Russo has said the same thing. You know, and Vince Russo got crucified for saying the same thing. I'm pretty sure Jim Cornette's going to jump all over this and absolutely rip Eric Bischoff a new asshole again and again over this. But I don't see the problem with what he said. You know, wrestling matches, wrestling for the sake of wrestling is not, that ain't it. You know, it just ain't it. We need more, you know, and basketball needs more. That's why they pump out documentaries and they have an ESPN. Football, same thing, hockey, golf. You know, I've seen people do profiles on golf players because this is going to be, you know, he's going for the grand championship or whatever the hell, you know. It makes people more excited to see the event itself. Anybody who disagrees with Eric Bischoff, I would love to know your reasoning. Hit me in the comment section. Let me know your reasoning for caring so much about matches without story. I don't get it. I don't know, man. But let's get into this thing. I've talked enough. This one is very interesting. Wrestling for 20 years was a playground for people who desperately wanted to write regular television, but didn't have enough talent to do so. Between Russo, Bischoff, and Vince, there has been an astounding amount of self-loathing deeply embedded in wrestling history. Maybe on the Russo tip, this would be true. But most of these people were, and Russo included, were successful in writing wrestling television. It's like, maybe you should realize the theme that these guys, these three people who are fairly successful in the industry that you claim to really care so much about, especially if you call yourself a historian or whatever the case may be, these people is the reason you watch wrestling today. You know, either you grew up in WCW, which probably has some Russo involvement. WWF had a lot of Russo involvement. TNA had Russo involvement. You know, Paul Heyman didn't do anything much different than what these guys were doing. You know, and Heyman grew up a super wrestling fan, but Heyman also had lesbian angles. He also had Brandon Irons. He also had all kind of other ridiculous stuff going on in ECW. In TNA, it was the same thing. You know, so it's been over 20 years. It's been over 30 years, you know? Like, the stuff that you guys think pro wrestling is died out with, like, Bill Watts and Vern Gagne. Ever since, like, those two guys went out of business, wrestling ain't been pure pro wrestling for the sake of. And even then, guys were getting tarred and feathered on Mid-South. You know? They had, you know, there was Now I don't know. I don't know that much about AWA, but again, there was some pretty ridiculous shit going on in Mid South. And it wasn't over the top. It wasn't White Castle of Fear. It wasn't nothing like that going on. But there were some pretty over the top things going on in Mid South. It was interesting that those fans liked it, but it was all about talking people into the building, blinding the junkyard dog, or you know, Butch Reed calling the junkyard dog Uncle Tom or something like that in order to get people interested in watching them wrestle. There's nothing wrong with that. And to think that the business has been self-loathing because they've been trying to expand is not, it's so short-sighted. It's people who have been attempting to expand the business beyond what it is because they knew they had more experience. Most of them, especially Bischoff and Vince, they knew that wrestling as it was in the 80s or whatever was dying out. It was time to do something different. You got to cross over. You got to do different things. You know, there's nothing wrong with it. But here's the thing. I'm just going to quote this every time Bischoff does something ridiculously out of touch with modern wrestling. Oh, I'm sorry, modern wrestling fans. And 85% of those fans do care about wrestling matches. I'm sure they do. You know, when we go to the indie shows, like I go to the indie shows and stuff like that, I'm pretty sure it's not going to be that much in the way of storytelling. It's going to be just matches. You know, it's so... But there's a way of doing that might still be interesting. Because if I go to a GCW show or some local indie, there's still going to be story within the match that's going to be interesting. I'm going to be interested in being part of the show, the experience. It's like sometimes you go to a concert, and like when I went to a Lauryn Hill concert, right? Lauryn Hill is the main event or whatever. She's the only person on the card I knew. Everybody else, I'm just there for the experience. I may learn something, I may not. I may like who's out there, I may not. I'm just basically there for the experience. You know? Sometimes that's what wrestling fans are doing. They just go to the show for the experience, for the energy, so they can be there when something happens. If something were to happen. And that's a different thing than just caring about cold matches. You know, it's a little bit different. All right, so let's go into this one. I mean, fair, the in-ring aspect of wrestling isn't for everyone. Some fans are really here for the soap opera, and frankly, more power to them. Yes, but that's wrestling in general. Yes, I too hate when there is wrestling on the wrestling program I'm watching. Really just gets in the way of the storytelling. Idiot. You don't really understand that the matches are indeed, and Bischoff would tell you that the matches have to be a vehicle for the story every time. And this does, cause some issues, because these guys sometimes do forget that the matches are important. But sometimes the fans forget that the matches are just vehicles for the story. So when something happens, like Vince books a disqualification, people get pissed and they want to throw everything and scream like, the Seth Rollins and The Fiend. It was a vehicle for storytelling. That's really all the match is. So having a match that The Fiend doesn't get pinned in and you don't switch the title because Rollins doesn't lose, it seemed like a good idea to him that we could just book a non-finish. Now, to people like us who are, investing time into this match, you fucking ruined it. You fucked this up. But for Vince, hey, I didn't lose anything. They told a story within the match that led to the next match. They're done and done. But to everybody else, they're disappointed because they have this notion that it's like Japanese pro wrestling where, everybody gets beat with a clothesline or you get pinned with a finish and then that's supposed to continue the feud. It's like, no, this is episodic storytelling. Sometimes you do things just to have the match and you get out of it without somebody losing so that you can come back to it later. So that, there's something to discuss on Monday. So that there's something to discuss on Friday. Because it's pretty fucking clear if somebody gets beat with a clothesline, who's the better man, and that's it. It's over. you know? But if you book it in a way that there's some kind of chicanery or whatever, then you have something to build upon. The matches should not always look the same. They don't always need to be a long match of significant length. You don't need any of that crap. It's not always necessary. But I do understand the frustration with Seth Rollins versus The Fiend, which is an extreme example, of, Vince just not giving a shit about a match. He put the match on the screen and basically just didn't give a fuck about it. It was just kind of like, hey, go out there and have this match, but, we're going to fuck this thing up and, get out of it on the other end. All right, so here's another one. Can you imagine being a part of a business for decades and hating the very thing that the business is built around? Well, here's the thing. A lot of people don't get emotionally invested in the things that they create because they know how transitory these things are. And I listened to, I forget what channel it is. I like to dip out of wrestling from time to time so people can really understand. They were talking negatively about Stan Lee. One of the architects of Marvel Comics. Stan Lee didn't really like comic books. He wanted to be a novelist. And part of the reason he took the name Stan Lee is because he didn't want his real name, associated with comics, just in case, the comics thing didn't work out. He thought it was a lesser form of entertainment. But he ended up finding great success in comics, and he ended up becoming one of the greatest ambassadors for comics ever. But his dream of being a novelist is sometimes used against him by people who don't like him. So generally speaking, but you have to understand too, it was his experience wanting to write great novels that led him to bring something different to comic books. Sometimes when somebody wants to do something else, they will find a way to build that into what they're currently doing. Like me. I wanted to write a novel. It hasn't been finished. I've finished plenty of novels. But part of what I do is I like to talk about storytelling. I like to research and understand storytelling. And I say to myself, hey, you know what? I could do that on YouTube. Boom, here it is. I tell people this all the time. There is something that underlies things that you might actually want to do. Stan Lee had a passion for telling stories in a different medium. He just found a way to get that to work in the medium that he was actually in. And it ended up working. So no, he didn't have the lifelong dream of being a comic book writer and all that kind of stuff. And he wasn't the kind of comic book writer that other kind of comic book writers were, where he did a ton of research and sketched out all his ideas and had character Bibles and stuff like that. And some people even say he didn't even create half the shit that he said he created. But there is something unique that when you read a Stan Lee written comic book character, Stan Lee wrote it, or at least had a hand in it, because of the way that the characters flow, the attitudes that he brings. Sometimes he even infuse personality and charm into these characters. That was something different that made these characters jump off the page. And say the same thing about Vince McMahon. Vince, grew up wrestling, but I didn't hear anything about Vince being a super wrestling fan as a kid, and then he gets into the business and, Vince wants to be Walt Disney. So he just decides he's going to flip the business on his fucking head. And that's why we have the Attitude Era, the Ruthless Aggression Era. You got Cena and Hogan and Austin and Rock and all this kind of stuff. Is because Vince had a different vision than people who just wanted to be wrestling promoters. A guy who, bought into the territory because he was a top guy like Bill Watts or Vern Gagne, or a billionaire who liked wrestling when he was a kid, like Ted Turner or something like that, or grew up in the business like Jim Crockett. It was a different vision. It was something unique. And what he brings to the table enhances what the thing is. What Bischoff is saying is he's not that big of a fan of matches. He doesn't care that much about matches. But everything that he does enhances the match. And you can't say that it doesn't. There's been some mid-ass in-ring athletic matches at like a WrestleMania or Starrcade or something like that. But you were invested in it because either A, they told a really good story leading up to it, B, it was a really good story coming out of it, C, the grandeur of Starrcade or WrestleMania or whatever really lifted the importance of this match and made you feel like you should care about it even if you really don't, or something to that effect, And so I still don't see the problem. I still don't see a problem with it. Somebody says, I watched 98, 99 WCW. I know. Well, you have to understand Russo took over at some point in 99. But if you watched WCW in 98, you knew that Bischoff cared enough about matches to give you huge Goldberg versus Hogan match, which, if you talk to Bischoff about it, listen to Bischoff talk about it, it was supposed to, I think he said it was supposed to come back to something else later. So he didn't really think too much about, throwing it on TV. But that's part of, an extreme. Bischoff doesn't care about matches. He cared about promotion and marketing and winning the ratings war and all that kind of stuff. So he sacrificed a match that he probably should have saved. And sometimes you can even say WCW's matches, the format of the matches and stuff like that were not entirely proper because Bischoff wasn't really focusing on that. So, he's the brains behind the operation. There's plenty of wrestlers. And that's the thing about, people want to blame Russo or McMahon or Bischoff about it. It's like those guys have their input, sure. And sometimes their input isn't the best. But there's plenty of agents and producers, a lot of whom are former wrestlers that are in the backstage area. Like a lot of this stuff, when you listen to Bischoff and he's talking about why why X, Y, or Z happened, he would say, absolutely, Kevin Sullivan was like the producer or the booker or whatever. He didn't have anything to do with it. Okay, I appreciate that. When Russo didn't want anything to do with the wrestling part, I can appreciate that. He's not the wrestling guy. He's the angle and story guy. All right, cool. I don't see that as a knock on Russo. I think it's great that Russo didn't want to be part of something that he didn't know how it worked. He didn't understand ring psychology, so he backed away from it and said, I don't want anything to do with that. I don't want to fuck that up. You guys figure that out. You guys make that work. I don't have a problem with that. I don't have a problem with that at all. So it's the problem. It says, that's crazy, dude. It's almost like he killed two wrestlers' companies. I'm sorry. What does that mean? Two wrestlers' companies. Well, I guess here's a guy from, I don't know. I thought this guy was from Fightful, but apparently not. I think he's talking about TNA and WCW. Well, WCW was never going to be run by wrestlers. That was never going to happen. The closest thing to a wrestler to run WCW was Bill Watts. And even at the time, Bill Watts was still more of an executive. His company had already gone under. But it was always going to be somebody in television that was going to be running WCW. So it might as well be somebody who has a wrestling background. And when it comes to Vince, and just to double back to Vince, understand Vince did a lot of learning under like Dick Ebersol and a lot of those other people learning about television because, that was the future. While everybody else was still shooting angles for house shows, Vince was doing big shit on TV, so it's pretty cool. Even though, he wasn't going as far, his television wasn't as exciting as Mid-South or whatever, because Mid-South was doing more stars versus stars on TV and stuff like that. It says, here we go. It is wild to think that so many people who have had positions of power in the business simply do not like pro wrestling. He didn't say that. He didn't say that he wasn't a fan of pro wrestling. He just said he likes other things more. God damn it. If I say I like pizza, oh, well, you don't like French fries? It's like, wait a minute. I'm not a big fan of like cold French fries. I don't eat French fries all the time, man. But you flip burgers for a living. You work at the fry machine. Like, God damn, I don't have to love it just because I do it. I do it because I'm good at doing it. And you can't argue that Bischoff wasn't good at doing it because he fucking did it for 4 fucking years. and ended up turning this shit around and making the kind of wrestling that you guys want to sit around talking about on the internet. So I don't understand how you could be mad at him. I think, if anything, it's a Herculean effort that this guy who didn't give a fuck about wrestling matches managed to put together so many really good fucking wrestling matches for his wrestling television show. I don't know. Here's another one. This man was being hired as recently as 2 years ago to head up the creative direction of the world's largest wrestling company. Well, no, he was the executive producer. He wasn't really going to be involved with. He was going to have to know what's going on in terms of creative, but that was never really going to be his job. He was going to be in production. He's going to be a liaison to Fox. That was his job. His job was basically the television side of wrestling, not the creative side. So, no, he was going to work in the television part of WWE. But of course, everybody is involved with creative to a degree because they have to know what's going on, and they have to, pitch ideas and stuff like that. But also Vince's meetings were like 4 hours long, so he said he was ill prepared to deal with that. Let's see. Let's see what else. Explains a lot, you old ass man. Oof. Old. He's the only old guy in the world. If you look at the other projects Eric has been involved in, he's clearly not a fan of good television in general. This is very much the man who would sell shitty fast food burgers whilst claiming that a master chef doesn't know what he's doing. Well, you have to understand too. We've had this conversation with this analogy before. McDonald's is not exactly fine dining, but McDonald's sells more hamburgers than anybody else. And it's, the top fast food chain in the country and in the world, actually. So that means it's one of the top restaurants in the world, despite the fact that everybody claims to hate it. If you talk to the average Joe, they hate McDonald's. I don't know anybody who eats McDonald's. Yet they continue to make money. All these people who hate Walmart, Walmart continues to make money. It's not hated by enough people. So you want to talk about Bischoff and his other business ventures. If you're an entrepreneur, and anybody who's ever actually tried to run businesses, you know that there's a high failure rate for pretty much everything. Pretty much any business you get involved in is going to be a pretty high failure rate. And anything that you succeed in is just a launching pad to something else. And that's just kind of how it is. Like, you even look at people who are successful, like 50 Cent. Successful musician, was able to parlay that into a clothing line, which ultimately was a fad and it flamed out. There was G-Unit shoes that kind of flamed out too. But the TV shows and stuff like that he started to do, okay, that worked. So if you keep trying different things, some things are going to fail, some things are going to succeed. So sure, a lot of Bischoff's ideas don't really work, but he had ideas that did work too. So it's just maybe they didn't work to a large degree. Like Vince's XFL. Most people wouldn't even got that shit on TV, let alone getting it a complete season out of it. Like, that in itself is a success. They even got the league started. Understand, there's a lot of trap doors just getting that damn thing up and running. Even getting facilities to have the games in, getting the players, all that kind of stuff. There's a lot of trap doors in getting a league running. It's not easy, You look at the NFL or the NBA that's been going on for 100 fucking years or something like that. Think, it's just easy. I can just go start up my own league. It ain't that easy. It's pretty difficult. But so even getting that thing up and running was a victory. But getting it some momentum to keep moving, well, that's even harder. Running a business is not easy. I don't know why people think that you failing to run a business appropriately is some kind of failure on your part. It's like, sometimes you do start some stuff at the wrong time. Or sometimes you just suck. You never can tell. All right, it says, I still find it amazing that him, Vince Russo, Vince being McMahon, Russo, and Kevin Dunn have all shaped the direction wrestling has gone, and yet clearly don't like wrestling. It's because they understand that it's television. Too many people are looking at wrestling in a different way. It's a mere misunderstanding in which these people are promoting and which you are consuming. That's why Vince calls it sports entertainment, to get away from the concept of wrestling. But it's very interesting that people brought up Kevin Dunn. That's a good one. Somebody says, then don't own a wrestling company. Well, he doesn't own a wrestling company. He doesn't. He doesn't want to. That seems weird. Maybe this isn't the mode of entertainment for you then. Another case of folk won't read beyond the headline. Well, that's absolutely true. Nobody's gonna read beyond the headline. What is the point of wrestling if we can't have entertaining wrestling matches, Eric? No wonder he killed every company's creative team he touched. If we can't have entertaining wrestling matches. We're talking about the masses here. The masses, especially now that they know that wrestling isn't real. Matter of fact, they don't even watch real fights without knowing what's going on. It's not like you can just put up a poster somewhere. Babyface Nelson is going to fight, one-eyed Greg Allman, at the Coliseum, and then a bunch of people are going to show up. That's not how it works. Somebody's got to be known. Somebody's got to be familiar with somebody. That's come on. Whether it's boxing, MMA, or whatever. You have to do the marketing and the promotion and the hype and all this kind of stuff. That's what gets people want to see this shit. So whether the wrestling is fake or real, you have to get people invested in caring about this shit. And if you can't successfully do that, then who the fuck cares about your matches? People only care about your matches when you get them invested into it. Here's an actually interesting one. What a fucking idiot. How are you in the wrestling business if you don't enjoy wrestling matches? Why the fuck do wrestlers go learn to bump if you only want to see them talk? Yeah. Jesus H. Christ, that is not what he said. He finds the talking and everything else to be more interesting, because there's 100 different ways to do that. Most guys are going to go in there and have the same match that they have every fucking time anyway. Especially when you look at some of the greats, they had a formula. Flair and all these guys, man, they all have a sort of a formula. They're pretty much going to do the same spots, maybe in different times of the match. It's all about how are we going to get there? How are we going to get this match in the ring and get people involved in it? How are we going to get people to care about it? But I like the whole, why do wrestlers go learn to bump if you only want to hear them talk? Let's see. As much as I hate to say it, I kind of agree with Bischoff. As a child, I tuned in for the matches. As an adult, I stay for the story. All right. So somebody says, yeah, we know. Glad you finally admitted it. You can't have wrestling stories without wrestling matches. You can. You could tell entertaining stories and avoid the ring as much as possible and then have maybe one fucking match. But it's not likely something that people are going to try to do, because you do have to have a payoff, and that's where the payoff is. The payoff should be in the ring. That's really the important thing. Vince McMahon and Eric Bischoff are one and the same. I don't know about that. Vince actually did kind of thought that the match was important, but he emphasized the story because the match is what it is. Wrestling is part of the story. Yes, it is part of the story. For Christ's sake, I'm glad you noticed. And these are the types of people whose opinions don't matter. Not one lick. Old fart still talks about wrestling, yet isn't a fan of it. That's like me having a whole NFL podcast, yet I'm not a football fan. So I'm going to just hate watch to talk shit. No, it's nothing like that at all. There are people who are fans of football, but they don't watch every single football game. They know that, football games are what they are. I guarantee you Stephen A. Smith does not watch every football game. I guarantee you he does not. He can't. He would never actually have time to do anything else. Part of his job is going to be getting a spreadsheet of statistics from various games. Probably watch two or maybe one or two of them. Watch the important games. The big midday game, the Sunday night game, the Monday night game. That's pretty much it. Everything else, he'll stumble across some statistics or get handed a sheet of paper where it says this was what the quarterback did and all this kind of stuff. And then that's it. They don't talk. There's people whose jobs it is to go into deep detail about football because they watch pretty much every single game. And those people don't get the views or the recognition that a Stephen A. Smith would get. Some people recognize that there's more to sports than the actual competition part, And I think over the years, especially over the last 20 to 30 years, people have recognized how much importance the media has to the success of sports and the success of players. Case in point, LeBron James. He was called the King LeBron. All that shit was going on before most people had even heard of him. They was putting his high school basketball games on ESPN. They was exposing him to the nation because there were sports reporters who were on the ground saying, this guy's really good and he's going to be great. And then they just started touting him. There's like 60% of LeBron James fandom, especially when he was a kid, had never even fucking seen him. They didn't really even know who he was. They were just caught up in the hype. And it gets like that with wrestling too. It gets like that with wrestling too, where it's all just hype. It's hype. And then, yes, the game's on. And now you're sitting there watching it like, hell yeah, I get a chance to see this new hot star be made or whatever. People do it every fucking Wednesday for AEW. You hear about some guy who had a great match on the indies and all of a sudden he's going to be in AEW. Yay! This is all the dirt sheets told me. You're falling into the same trap. Part of the storytelling is going to be the match, but a large percentage of it is going to be in everything else around it. And then somebody says, we can stop listening to him now. There's a critique to be made here that he dancing around the wrestling matches have become homogenized, and wrestlers, bookers, and agents should cultivate an atmosphere where there really are differences in the top guys' styles. But because wrestling is monkey see, monkey do, industry thinkers, in quotations, like Eric Bischoff say things like, quote, I really don't like the matches. Let's get rid of them. And then that gets headlines because grifters know headlines get people talking. Eric Bischoff is a neocon libertarian grifter. What? He had a good thing going, and then he whiffed off into he's a libertarian neocon grifter. Like, what the hell? How did we get there? I don't know how we got that far, which is pretty funny, Oh, here's an interesting one. In 2017, Bischoff thought ROH airing on WGN was a potential game changer, and ROH could become a major player. In 2022, Bischoff says ROH is worthless garbage, despite potentially landing on a bigger platform in web discovery and having a better owner in TK. Well, guess what, sir? In 2017, he was making a prediction based off the information he had at the time. Meaning that if you get on WGN, which is a national cable station that pretty much anybody who has cable has WGN, then yes, they would have been national cable television, which would have been major for Ring of Honor. In 2022, Ring of Honor is a defunct brand that is being kept alive because Tony Khan is constantly pumping on its chest and breathing air into it. It's not breathing on its own. And it's not on WB Discovery. All right? And who knows if it ever will be. I think so many people are hanging their hats on Tony Khan getting Ring of Honor this television deal as if it's some kind of set in stone kind of thing. It's like, I don't see anything that says it's going to be anywhere near set in stone. It could possibly happen, but it's just something that could possibly happen. We don't know whether it actually will. But he assumed that it would, because I think Sinclair Broadcasting owns WGN. At least I think it did. But if we even, and the guy used screenshots, which is the worst thing, because then you can actually see Bischoff fully talking about Ring of Honor. And he's talking about how it would increase their visibility because more people have cable, and they'll be able to find it weekly instead of being on syndication where people don't know, syndicated broadcast networks. Who the hell knows? People don't even watch those channels anymore. Like people have all kinds of, streaming, well, I shouldn't say streaming services because it wasn't that big in 2017, but people have all different kinds of ways of watching shows. Why would the hell they be chasing down a syndicated TV show, let alone a syndicated wrestling show? I mean, if you're going to critique the guy, fine, but at least do something smart, not this kind of shit. Here's another one. I love storytelling, but I fucking hate words. Eric Bischoff, basically. It's literally called a promo because it's promotional. Imagine if people talked about any other art form like wrestling fans sometimes talk about wrestling. Yeah, the movie is important, but you know what really matters? A good poster. A good poster is important for a movie because sometimes people get excited about posters. Sometimes somebody won't go see a movie because of the poster. We know that that's true because Marvel X'd out the Black Panther out of the Black Panther posters for China. We know that posters are important because they took John Boyega off the posters, the Star Wars posters, when they promoted it in China. We know that it's important to have posters because you will honestly see whatever woke garbage they decide to put into the movie theater, they will put it on the poster first. So they'll know what you're promoting. These people, come on. They're not sending their best. They're not sending their best. My hand's swollen. Oh, here's one that's pretty stupid. I see Eric Bischoff learned well from Kevin Dunn. There is no doubt that storylines, promos, moments are important. They're needed so the audience can get emotionally invested. But you still need to have wrestling matches on a wrestling show. Otherwise, where is the payoff? Sir, he did not say we should never have any matches ever. He didn't say that. All right. He just said he's more interested in other parts. He understands that wrestling has to be the matches are an important part of the show. For Christ's fucking sake, when he ran WCW, they still had matches. What the hell? Do you think WCW didn't have matches for 5 fucking years or something? Is that what you think? You idiot? Here's a ridiculous one. I love a steak dinner, but I'm just not that fond of the steak. It's the worst part of the steak dinner. The best part is the sizzle. People put too much emphasis on the steak, not enough on the sizzle. Also need some ketchup. Amazing. This analogy doesn't work, obviously, but it was a nice little reach. This was a good one. I found that one to be very, very good. Oh, Bischoff doesn't care about matches, which is why Jericho, Guerrero, and the man I'm not mentioning went to the other company and became world champions. I understand wrestling is about the build to want to see the match, but he had some of the best wrestlers and never gave them a shot they deserved. Well, because he also had some people who could fucking draw on the show. And since Jericho, Guerrero, and Benoit were not drawing, and Malenko was also one of those guys, they weren't really a draw, he didn't focus on those guys. He didn't focus on great wrestling. He focused on people who could tell compelling stories. Guess why? Because those people who were telling compelling stories were selling the tickets. They were selling the tickets. Oh, you know what? Fuck that. You know better. We would have put The Rock in the first match and Dean Malenko in the main event because, well, The Rock is not as good a wrestler as Dean Malenko. Oh, get the fuck out of here. Stupid. Here's an interesting one. Can't really blame them. Matches have got so repetitive and rarely seem to serve an actual purpose other than people getting their shit in. Half of AEW's roster couldn't explain why their character wrestles the way they do. It's just spots with no psychology. And then somebody says you could easily switch AEW with WWE. The storytelling is also repetitive. Maybe, because stories tend to be kind of repetitive, especially in a certain medium. It kind of works. There's cliches and tropes that work in every medium. Wrestling is no different from any other medium that's going to have its tropes. But I think the bigger picture here is his bang on assessment of AEW wrestling matches. These guys don't know how to work a character because so many of them don't have any. And that's the thing. Like, they don't have characters. So no, they don't know how to work a character. No, they don't know how a character is supposed to work because they don't have one. It's that simple. Even mentioning some shit like that will get people's eyebrows raised. So they're like, what do you mean work your character? Why does your character wrestle like that? You're supposed to do everything you know how to do. It's like, no. No. Literally, no. There is a certain percentage of wrestler that is actor, right? And an actor is going to choose his skill set based on the role that he's involved in. What moves you use as a babyface and as a heel are going to be different. They should be different. You should wrestle differently as a babyface or as a heel. You should wrestle differently if you're going to be a high flyer or if you're going to be a technician. Choose your moves based off of what your character is supposed to be and what the angle you're involved in. If your angle has been, hey, I've been hitting this guy in the knee with pipes for 4 months, then I'm going to work the knee in the match. I mean, come on. All of a sudden, we're going to start doing fucking Canadian destroyers and jumping off ladders and shit after I just hit this guy in the knee 600 times with this lead pipe. I mean, that's just no psychology. That makes no fucking sense. So, yeah, I agree with this guy. Guy, whoever you are, guy, you're a smart guy. Hopefully, you're listening to this. Here's an interesting one. So that's why Eric hates on AEW so much. He wants less in-ring wrestling and more long-winded promos that lead to a story, even though the eventual payoff to the story would end in a wrestling match. A good story can improve a match for sure, but what good is a storyline getting fans emotionally invested if the payoff match itself stinks? Well, I'm about to get a little scumbag capitalist on you. Doesn't matter. Already got your money. I mean, sorry, sad to say, hate to tell it. I think I've talked on here before about Bob Sapp, who used his name as a big star in Japan to draw people into fights, MMA fights that he was being involved in. And then he would just turtle up, not really even fight the fight. I mean, because he got paid. Tickets already sold, checks already cleared. Doesn't really need to put in the effort to make the fight any good at that point. And plus, there's been some shitty matches that have had great storyline build-up. And this is a very important piece of the puzzle because I've seen a lot of people starting to do this now. I've seen a couple of guys on Twitter say it. I think Brian Alvarez say it. In the midst of all of this White Rabbit stuff, does everybody remember that Bray Wyatt sucks? He's not a good wrestler. Like, it's like people are excited about something that has fuck all to do with wrestling. You know, people don't give a fuck about that. That was the thing. You cared about it. All of your work rate marks who are supporters of yours cared about it. You can vote on worst wrestler all you want. But there were people buying his merchandise. There are people hanging upon his every word. That's why there are people who are going back digging into FCW tapes and all that other kind of shit because they're interested in that character and in what he was doing, what he's building, what is he constructing, what has he got going on. That intrigue, that interest is far more important than any fucking match that's going to come out of this White Rabbit thing. Not a single match that's going to come out of this thing is going to be more important than everything that's going on right now. And that's eating up the work rate, folks. It's eating at them now. He sucks in the ring. He's not a good wrestler. It's like, yeah, by your standards. But Ricochet can't do this. He can't get people this interested. If he could, he would. Will Ospreay ain't that fucking interesting. Sorry to tell you. I know we're supposed to believe Will Ospreay is one of the best in the world, but if he could get the buzz, and get people to care about him and what he's doing, he would draw more money. He would be on top somewhere. But he can't. All he can do is jump backwards off the top rope into a diamond cutter. That's all he can do. All they can do is a handspring over the top rope. It's interesting, but once you've seen it, you've seen it. Sometimes people come along and they do things that are far more interesting than what you think is important. You know, to take you outside of wrestling one more time, the image revolution in comic books, where, you know, the artists were kind of pissed off that, you know, hey, people think that the writers are more important. You know, it's like the art is more important. So we're going to go and create a bunch of books and we're going to be as creative as possible. This is in the mid 90s. And so they left Marvel and DC, specifically Marvel, and they formed Image Comics. And it was a bunch of artists, most of whom were not good at writing. They weren't good at writing stories, coming up with characters, basically cool looking characters, but the stories were trash. And people were just buying them up because they loved the art. But the stories were garbage. So while they sold at the time, none of them became timeless stories because the stories weren't any good because these guys were not fucking writers. Scumbag capitalists said in the moment they made all the money they were ever going to need to make by just drawing cool shit. In 20 years of nobody cares, too bad. Make the money right now. And that's what happened. Some of these guys are still like Todd McFarlane is still drawing Spawn and shit. Now Spawn has gotten better because, you know, the writers have gotten better. And Spawn is a character that was actually so popular he ended up with a movie and a cartoon show on HBO. But he also had guest writers like Alan Moore and Neil Gaiman come in and creating his universe. But Todd McFarlane can't fucking write. Sometimes people are going to tell you that one thing is more important than the other. It's not always going to be the truth. Sometimes somebody can get over just by being a good artist. Sometimes they can. Sometimes there's going to be a guy who's a Chris Benoit. Not much of a personality, but a really fucking awesome wrestler who could tell really good in-ring stories. And people are going to be very excited just to see him because he's going to go in there, he's going to have a physical contest, and he's going to get over his angle, he's going to get over his story. And no, he's not going to have the greatest promos in the world, but people are going to love him anyway. Those people are going to be few and far between. Few and far between. They're going to be there, but it's only going to be a handful of them. In about a 10-year span, probably like 2 or 3 of them will actually get to a point of, you know, being a superstar of any major wrestling promotion. Most of the guys who are going to go far are going to be guys who have charisma. Guys who are a lot of flash. They can draw you into something immediately. Bill Goldberg, perfect example. You know, draws what didn't last long. At least his heyday didn't last long. It lasted about a year and some change. But in a year and some change, man, he made a huge impact. Far more impact than people who were quote unquote better wrestlers who wrestled for 15 fucking years. Guys have been doing this for 30 years. Don't have near the impact of Bill Goldberg's year and a half. Because Bill Goldberg drew people in. People was interested in all of the presentation around Goldberg. Him marching to the ring with the escorts, with the police escort, and breathing in the fire. The fans chanting Goldberg, Goldberg. Match was 3 minutes. They didn't give a fuck. Ultimate Warrior, theme song, how he looks, you know, the colors, bursting through the tunnel, running to the ring. People didn't give a shit if he was not going out there. I have never heard anybody outside of dorks that love work rate, you know, who you're trying to judge your arm drag, care that much about the Ultimate Warrior and whether he was having great matches or not. Nobody gives a fuck. The thing is, the guy was fucking captivating. You saw him on TV, you're like, oh my God, what the fuck is that? Oh my God, what the fuck am I listening to? Oh my God, this guy's about to kill this fucking guy. Like this fucking rules, this energy. It's different, you know. No, he cannot go out there and Greg the Hammer Valentine have a match for 40 minutes. He just can't do it. It wasn't going to work out. That was not his blessing. That was not his lot in life. I'm okay with that. I am a fan that's okay with that. I'm all right with it. And I'll be the first to tell you, I don't like every Ultimate Warrior match. I like enough of them. I like the same ones that you like. The ones where he wrestled opponents who are really good, like Rick Rude and Randy Savage and Hulk Hogan. I hate the same ones that you probably hate too, when he wrestled guys who aren't that good and he had to go in there and try to do some real work. Those things didn't turn out so well. But it was all about the presentation. Vince was able to create and gin up interest in the Ultimate Warrior where he could go out there. And people were not sitting on their hands as soon as the bell rang. They were into it. And they were into whatever he did. And whatever happened to him. They cared about him. They thought he was cool. Sometimes that's more important than, your wrist locks being good. Fuck. I mean, it's so childish. I hate it so much. Here is going to be the grand finale, the last one that I'm going to read. It's the rare double dip. The rare instance where somebody makes this segment twice. Wrestling will never be more dramatic or complex than The Sopranos. Wrestling will never be funnier than Frasier. If you like to watch wrestling without wrestling matches, might I recommend regular television? You'll have a much better time. Motherfucker, nobody says that it has to be the best at anything. It does not have to be the best at it. It doesn't even have to be the best at nothing. It's not even going to be the best wrestling. It's not going to be the best wrestling I've ever seen. I can tell you that much. That's not the point. The point isn't to be the best at everything. No, it's to be good at a lot of different things. Case in point, this is very interesting that, a lot of people are really eating up Bischoff for this. But didn't the Wrestling Observer newsletter, didn't they complain that Raw had too many matches on it? And Brian Alvarez, if I remember correctly, or was it Meltzer, it was one of the two, that were longing for the days of the Vince McMahon variety show, where you would do some segments, you do a match, then you would do some backstage skits, and you would just do different things throughout the night to keep people refreshed and, a little bit off of, they wouldn't consistently have to sit and watch the wrestling. If I remember correctly, that literally just happened. As a matter of fact, let me look that up because I'm pretty sure it did. And let's see. It was August the 16th, where Brian Alvarez was talking on his show about wanting a variety show. That's what he wanted. The number one guy who complained that there was not enough Raw wrestling on Raw and SmackDown or whatever, saying that Triple H has too much wrestling on the wrestling show. Like, you can't win for losing. You can't lose. You can't win. You can't win. It doesn't matter what you do. People are going to complain. I agree. You got to have wrestling matches on the wrestling show, but for Christ's sake, shorten them. Especially if it's a cold match. Just shorten it. That's all you got to do, baby. Just shorten it. Make it short. All right? Get in. Get somebody over. Get out. Let's get somebody over via the microphone, via an angle or something like that. Let's not spend a lot of time lingering, especially if it's not a star-on-star match. If there's no angle between the two of them, there's nothing going to come out of this. Let's just get in and get out. How about that? Can we do that? Let's do that. All right. Thank you guys for your time. Like, share, subscribe. I'll talk to you guys later. Peace out.
MagMongoSlade. Best house I ever drew, Daddy.